Have you ever wondered why some people seem to carry an invisible power that can't be explained by looks, status, or charm? You notice them without trying. They walk into a room and the atmosphere shifts, not because they demand attention, but because their presence quietly insists on being acknowledged. This is not about popularity or charisma in the shallow sense, it's something deeper, rarer, almost untouchable. Carl Jung might have called it the aura of individuation, the energy of a person who has wrestled with their inner world and chosen self-mastery over distraction. Most people never reach this point because they are constantly entangled in cycles of validation, desire, and unconscious repetition. But the few who do, those who embody abstinence not merely as a physical choice but as a psychological stance, radiate a strength that others instinctively respect. They are not controlled by the push and pull of compulsions. Instead, they embody clarity, a centeredness that modern society rarely cultivates. When Jung spoke of individuation, he meant the process of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of yourself you usually hide from the world. To do this, you have to confront your shadow, the impulses, wounds, and cravings that drive behavior when you aren't aware of them. Abstinence, in its deepest sense, isn't about denying yourself pleasure. It's about refusing to let those unconscious drives define you. And that refusal, that disciplined clarity, creates an aura only about 1% of people ever achieve. Have you ever felt trapped by seeking validation from someone who barely deserved your attention? That restless checking of your phone, waiting for a message that never comes, or the quiet anxiety of wondering if you are enough? That's the shadow at work. It's the part of you that has learned, perhaps from early wounds, abandonment, or rejection, that your worth comes from external recognition. When you live this way, you give away your energy constantly, and others can sense it. You broadcast need instead of sovereignty. The rare aura we're exploring emerges when you reverse this pattern. When you decide not to hand over your power to fleeting desires or compulsions, you begin to embody restraint in a culture addicted to excess. Jung suggested that our unconscious patterns often control us until we make them conscious. Abstinence, in its truest form, is a conscious declaration: I will not be mastered by what seeks to master me. That decision alone changes how people perceive you. Think about how often people chase what numbs their anxiety rather than what strengthens their core. Some chase relationships, others chase attention, some chase physical intimacy, or distractions that dull the pain of silence. But abstinence requires you to confront that silence. It leaves no easy escape, no quick dopamine hit to cover over the emptiness. And in that confrontation, you find out who you really are. Have you noticed how uncomfortable it can feel to be truly alone, without distraction? That discomfort is precisely where transformation begins. From a Stoic perspective, the man or woman who cannot control themselves is a slave, no matter how free they appear. Epictetus reminded us that freedom is not found in indulging every impulse but in mastering them. The aura of the individuated person comes from this very mastery. They do not radiate desperation or grasping. They radiate choice. Others sense this even if they cannot articulate it. When you begin to live this way, people often react differently to you. Some feel drawn in, sensing your steadiness as a kind of safety. Others feel threatened, because your presence reminds them of their own lack of control. Jung described how projections shape relationships. We often project our unacknowledged wounds or desires onto others. When you no longer play into those unconscious projections, you disrupt the usual patterns. You stop being the mirror for someone else's neediness or fantasy, and instead stand as an autonomous figure. That autonomy is what makes the aura so rare. Ask yourself, how often do you enter relationships or connections not from a place of wholeness, but from lack? How many times have you thought, if only this person wanted me, then I would finally feel secure? That cycle is the opposite of individuation. It keeps you tied to shadows and wounds that drain your life force. The 1% aura arises when you no longer play that game. When you are capable of abstinence, of not needing someone else to validate you, you become magnetic in a completely different way. What's striking is that this power cannot be faked. You can't simply tell yourself you are self-sufficient while secretly clinging to the next source of attention. People sense authenticity on a level deeper than words. They can feel whether your calm is rooted in genuine self-mastery or whether it's a mask. And this is where the work becomes both difficult and liberating. Abstinence demands inner honesty. Jung believed that when you withdraw projections, you reclaim fragments of yourself that you've scattered onto others. Instead of saying, "I need this person to complete me," you begin to see that what you were searching for in them is a reflection of what you've neglected in yourself. That realization alone shifts your entire energy. It changes your relationships, your posture, even the way your eyes meet the world. The aura of the 1% is not a performance. It is the natural byproduct of choosing sovereignty over compulsion, wholeness over fragmentation. It is felt most strongly by those who have not yet attained it, because it confronts them with the possibility of what they, too, could become. This aura, the one that only a small fraction of people ever cultivate, is not rooted in perfection but in integration. Jung emphasized that true strength comes from holding together opposites, the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious, the desire for connection and the willingness to stand alone. Most people run from their inner contradictions, pretending they don't exist, covering them with distractions or temporary bonds. But you've likely noticed how exhausting it is to constantly suppress what you don't want to face. Abstinence brings these contradictions into the open. By refusing to numb yourself with constant stimulation, you confront the very impulses that often drive behavior in secrecy. The craving for validation, the fear of loneliness, the ache of rejection, these rise to the surface when there is no escape. And while most people run from that discomfort, the rare few who endure it and learn from it emerge with a clarity that cannot be manufactured. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole by bringing the unconscious into awareness. Have you noticed how society often teaches you to equate worth with being wanted? From a young age, many are conditioned to measure value through attention, affection, or desirability. You might have internalized the belief that if someone desires you, then you must be important. But this belief leaves you vulnerable to manipulation, trauma bonds, and cycles of dependency. The aura of sovereignty emerges when you step outside of that conditioning and discover that your worth is intrinsic, not conditional. The Stoics warned against attaching your identity to things beyond your control. Marcus Aurelius wrote that true peace comes when your happiness depends only on yourself and your actions, not on external outcomes. This is remarkably similar to Jung's idea of individuation. When you stop needing others to affirm you, you reclaim the fragments of your energy scattered across every relationship, every longing, every unanswered message. Have you ever felt the exhaustion of being spread too thin emotionally, giving so much energy to people who never gave it back? That fatigue is the cost of living from lack instead of fullness. When you live abstinently, not only physically, but emotionally, you stop negotiating with your worth. You stop saying, "If they notice me, then I will believe in myself." Instead, you carry yourself as someone who already knows their value. That inner stance radiates outward, forming the aura that others instinctively notice. People may not understand why they respect you more, why they feel drawn to you, or even why they feel uneasy around you. But they sense it. They sense that you cannot be easily swayed, and that your attention is deliberate, not desperate. This deliberate energy disrupts the normal dynamics of attraction. Think about how many relationships begin with unconscious projections. Someone sees in you what they are missing in themselves, and suddenly you become the stage for their unresolved wounds. You've likely experienced this, being idealized one moment, then devalued the next. It's not really about you, it's about the shadow being projected onto you. But when you embody sovereignty, you break this cycle. You are no longer a blank canvas for someone else's unconscious needs. Instead, you stand as a mirror that forces them to see their own lack of integration. This is why the aura can sometimes be unsettling. Not everyone welcomes the confrontation of their own shadow. Some may feel intimidated or even hostile toward those who radiate individuation, because it threatens the illusions they rely on. Have you ever noticed that when you stop chasing validation, some people distance themselves? That's not a loss, it's a revelation. It shows you who was drawn to you for your light, and who was only feeding on your neediness. Abstinence exposes these truths with striking clarity. Without the constant fog of pursuit, you see more clearly who values you and who only benefits from your compromises. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Jung believed that once the unconscious is made conscious, it loses its power to control you. This is exactly what makes the aura so powerful. It is born of awareness, not denial. The energy of someone who has reclaimed themselves is unmistakable. They move differently, not in arrogance but in quiet assurance. They listen differently, because they are not scanning for validation in every word. They choose differently, because their decisions come from clarity, not fear of being alone. And you, if you are willing to endure the solitude, the silence, and the confrontation with your own unmet needs, can cultivate this same rare presence. But here is the challenge: it is easier to live in distraction than in self-confrontation. It is easier to seek another quick connection than to face the unease of abstinence. And yet, only in that unease do you discover the bedrock of your strength. This is why so few people carry this aura. Most choose the comfort of avoidance over the discomfort of growth. But the ones who do endure, the ones who wrestle with their shadow instead of denying it, become unshakable. The question is not whether you are capable of this transformation. You are. The question is whether you are willing to endure the silence long enough to meet yourself fully. Because when you do, you'll no longer chase what drains you. You'll no longer mistake attention for love, or validation for worth. You'll radiate something rarer, a presence that declares, without words, that you are whole. The rarity of this aura becomes clearer when you consider how much of human behavior is built on unconscious repetition. Jung explained that what we do not make conscious will return again and again as fate. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you found yourself in the same kind of relationship, drawn to the same type of person, only to end up with the same wounds reopened? It feels accidental, but it isn't. It is the shadow pulling you back into familiar suffering. Abstinence disrupts this cycle. By stepping back from compulsive patterns, whether they involve relationships, intimacy, or the constant seeking of attention, you break the automatic repetition. This doesn't mean you erase your desires, it means you refuse to let those desires dictate the path of your life. And this choice alone separates you from the majority. Most people would rather repeat their patterns endlessly than sit in the discomfort of change. But you can already sense that the cost of repetition is far greater than the cost of self-mastery. Have you ever wondered why solitude feels so threatening? Many people avoid it because, in silence, their inner voices become too loud. The doubts, the insecurities, the unresolved griefs, they all surface. In a world where distraction is always available, you are rarely required to face them. But abstinence forces you into that confrontation. And though painful at first, this confrontation is the birthplace of individuation. You discover that you are not defined by your wounds, but by your ability to integrate them. The Stoics echoed this truth. Seneca wrote that the greatest slavery is to be a slave to your own passions. Abstinence is the refusal to serve those passions. It's not repression, but redirection. It's the recognition that your energy is too valuable to be poured endlessly into the pursuit of temporary relief. When you withhold that energy, you consolidate it. And the result is not emptiness but a powerful presence others can feel, even if they can't explain it. This presence, this aura, is not loud. It does not announce itself. It is subtle, but undeniable. People notice when someone is no longer driven by unconscious hunger. They sense a steadiness that contrasts sharply with the restless energy of those who are still searching for completion outside themselves. That steadiness creates a gravitational pull. Some are drawn to it instinctively, craving the stability they lack. Others recoil, threatened by what it reveals about their own dependence. Have you noticed how often people use relationships as a way to avoid themselves? They may not even realize it. The need for constant attention, the fear of being single, the rush into situationships that lack depth, all of these are attempts to avoid solitude. But abstinence strips away that escape. It confronts you with the reality that if you cannot be with yourself, you cannot truly be with anyone else. And this realization, though difficult, is liberating. Jung spoke of the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies each person carries. These inner figures often appear in projection, shaping who we are drawn to. When you are unconscious of them, you chase partners who embody the traits you have neglected in yourself. But when you choose abstinence and turn inward, you begin to integrate these energies consciously. You stop needing another person to complete you, because you are already becoming whole. This is the hidden foundation of the 1% aura. You radiate wholeness rather than lack. It's important to see how radical this is in the context of modern culture. We live in a world that constantly encourages indulgence. Every advertisement, every algorithm, every cultural message says, you are incomplete until you consume more, until you are desired more, until you are chosen. To resist that narrative is to declare independence from the collective unconscious that governs so many lives. And independence always creates tension, because it highlights the conformity of those around you. Have you felt that tension when you begin to change? Perhaps friends question you, or people you once attracted no longer linger around you. This is natural. When you stop feeding into the same cycles, you change the dynamics that once defined you. Some will admire you for it, others will resent you. But both reactions are proof that your aura has shifted. The truth is, the aura of individuation cannot be imitated. It is not a strategy or a performance. You cannot pretend to be sovereign while secretly dependent on validation. People sense the difference. What creates the aura is the internal decision to face what you once avoided, to endure the solitude, to integrate the shadow. That process leaves a mark that is visible in your posture, your tone, your eyes, and even in the energy you bring into a room. And here is the paradox: the moment you no longer need to be chosen, people feel compelled to choose you. The moment you stop chasing, the world begins to notice. But by then, it no longer matters, because your value is no longer dependent on being noticed. You've already claimed it. That is the unshakable freedom at the heart of this rare presence. This kind of presence can feel almost unsettling when you first step into it, because it strips away everything you once used as proof of your worth. Jung often spoke of how the ego clings to illusions, and one of the strongest illusions is that love or validation from others is what makes us whole. But when you practice abstinence, whether it's from chasing attention, intimacy, or cycles of unhealthy connection, you come face to face with the emptiness beneath those illusions. At first, it feels like loss. You may notice the silence of your phone more sharply. You may notice that people who once seemed central to your life no longer occupy that space. You may even feel a grief that surprises you, as if part of you has died. In a way, something has, the part of you that lived on dependency, on the next distraction, on being chosen as proof of your existence. What takes its place is something infinitely stronger, though it grows slowly, a steady recognition that you exist, you are worthy, and you are whole without external confirmation. Have you ever realized that much of your energy was not truly yours, but scattered across the people and situations you invested in out of fear? You give and give, hoping to be enough, only to feel emptier in the end. Abstinence calls that energy back. It gathers what you've spent on chasing, on worrying, on performing, and recenters it in you. And when your energy is gathered, when you are no longer leaking it through unconscious habits, people sense the difference. That is why your aura shifts. You carry yourself differently, because you are no longer fragmented. The Stoics understood this same principle. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. What he called strength, Jung would describe as individuation, the alignment of the inner world so deeply that external validation loses its grip. When you embody this, you are no longer living reactively. You are no longer waiting for others to decide how you should feel about yourself. You are the one deciding. This decision does not make life easier in the short term. In fact, it often makes life harder. People may fall away when you stop feeding their need for control. Some relationships collapse when you are no longer willing to play the same unconscious roles. And solitude becomes more present than it has ever been. But solitude, rather than being a punishment, becomes the soil in which your wholeness grows. You begin to see that you were never truly afraid of being alone, you were afraid of meeting yourself in the silence. Think about this. How many times have you entered a relationship or a connection because the thought of being single was unbearable? How many times did you say yes, not out of desire, but out of fear of being unwanted? These choices are not neutral. They create bonds that drain you, that keep you stuck in cycles of repeating the same wounds. Abstinence breaks this pattern because it forces you to choose differently, not from fear, but from clarity. And clarity, unlike fear, creates alignment. The aura that results from this alignment feels different to everyone who encounters it. To some, it feels magnetic. They are drawn to the sense of calm, the absence of grasping. To others, it feels intimidating, because it shines a light on their own lack of integration. You may notice people questioning you, even challenging you, when you no longer play by the unspoken rules of need and validation. But that is part of the cost of individuation. You stop being what others want you to be, and you start becoming who you actually are. This shift is not about becoming untouchable or detached. On the contrary, it makes you more capable of genuine connection. When you are no longer enslaved by the need for validation, you can connect with others freely, without hidden agendas. You can love without grasping, because love is no longer a strategy for filling a void. This kind of connection is rare precisely because so few people have faced the shadow that abstinence forces to the surface. But when you embody it, the quality of your relationships transforms. Ask yourself, how would your life change if you no longer entered situations out of fear? How much energy would you reclaim if you stopped chasing what was never capable of giving you true fulfillment? The truth is, most people will never find out, because they are too attached to the cycle. But if you are willing to stand in the discomfort long enough, you will discover that what you thought was emptiness is actually spaciousness. It is room to grow, room to breathe, room to finally become whole. And that wholeness, that aura, is what makes you unforgettable. People may not be able to explain it, but they will feel it. You will feel it. Not as a performance, not as something to prove, but as a quiet certainty that you no longer belong to the cycles that once held you captive. You belong to yourself. The transformation deepens when you realize that abstinence is not just the absence of indulgence, it is the presence of sovereignty. Jung often emphasized that the path of individuation is not about erasing your desires but about reorienting them. The question is no longer, what can I get from this person, this situation, this fleeting moment, but instead, am I living in alignment with who I truly am? That shift changes everything, because it pulls you out of the unconscious loop of needing to be validated by others and places you firmly in the center of your own existence. Have you noticed how quickly people compromise themselves just to avoid disapproval? How often they silence their true thoughts, suppress their boundaries, or chase relationships they don't even deeply want, simply to feel chosen. This is the pattern of the majority. It comes from fear, the fear of being left behind, of being unseen, of facing the self without the mask of external recognition. But the 1% who cultivate this aura are different. They do not move from fear, but from clarity. Their yes is real, and their no is unshakable. The Stoics taught that nothing external can truly harm you unless you surrender your judgment to it. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Abstinence is the deliberate refusal to hand your power over to fleeting impulses or external pressures. It is the recognition that your judgment, your alignment, your self-respect, these are yours alone to protect. And when you protect them, your energy shifts. That's what others feel when they sense your aura, the weight of someone who cannot be easily swayed. But let's be honest, this path can feel lonely at times. When you are no longer willing to play the same unconscious games, you may find that certain people fade away. Relationships that once seemed vital reveal themselves as hollow. Social spaces that once felt exciting may now feel shallow. Have you experienced that quiet alienation that comes when you grow beyond the patterns that used to define you? It can feel like loss, but it's really a clearing. The more space you free, the more room you create for alignment with people and experiences that actually resonate with your wholeness. Jung wrote about the collective unconscious, the vast pool of patterns, fears, and archetypes that shape humanity. Most people live entirely within it, repeating inherited scripts without even realizing it. They chase because they've been taught to chase, they cling because they've been conditioned to fear solitude, they project because they've never been shown how to integrate. When you step outside of this, when abstinence breaks those cycles, you stand out. You become an anomaly, a reminder that there is another way to live. And that is what makes your aura feel so rare, it resists the collective current. You may find that your mere presence unsettles others, not because you are doing anything aggressive, but because your calm independence exposes their dependence. Have you ever had someone try to provoke you when you refused to play into their drama? Or felt the tension rise when you held your boundary without guilt? That discomfort they feel is not about you, it's about the mirror you hold up to their unacknowledged shadow. Your sovereignty reveals their lack of it. This is why the 1% aura can be both magnetic and polarizing. And yet, this is also why it is powerful. The aura is not about being untouchable or cold, it's about being anchored. When you are anchored, people know that your presence is a choice, not a compulsion. You are with them because you want to be, not because you need them to fill a void. This shifts the energy of every interaction. Imagine how different your life feels when you no longer ask, "Do they want me?" but instead ask, "Do I choose them?" That reversal is sovereignty. The deeper you embody this stance, the more you realize that abstinence is not a punishment or a deprivation. It is an investment. By refusing to scatter your energy across fleeting connections or compulsive patterns, you accumulate a quiet strength that cannot be imitated. This strength radiates in subtle ways, in how you walk into a room without scanning for approval, in how you listen without needing to be impressive, in how you hold eye contact without shrinking or grasping. None of these are techniques. They are natural byproducts of integration. Have you noticed how some people carry an anxious energy that almost begs for reassurance? And how others, without trying, seem to make you feel steadier just by being around them? That difference is the difference between fragmentation and wholeness. When you no longer live split between craving and avoidance, your presence becomes a stabilizing force. People may not know why they trust you, why they respect you, or why they feel different around you, but they do. That is the essence of the 1% aura. What makes it so rare is not that it's unattainable, it's that it requires you to endure what most people run from. The silence. The solitude. The confrontation with your own unmet needs. But once you've endured it, you find a peace that cannot be stolen, because it was never given to you by anyone else. It arose from within. And once you carry that peace, it becomes your signature, your unshakable presence in a world addicted to noise. When you arrive at this place of inner sovereignty, everything about how you relate to the world changes. Jung would call this the stage where individuation begins to bear fruit, the unconscious no longer dictates your choices, and you live with awareness rather than compulsion. You no longer mistake desire for destiny, or attention for love. And in this state, abstinence is not something you practice, it becomes a natural extension of who you are. Think about the contrast. Most people live in a constant state of reaching for validation, reaching for comfort, reaching for proof that they are worthy. Their relationships reflect that reach, filled with unspoken demands and fragile attachments. But when you embody sovereignty, the reaching stops. You are no longer looking to others to fill what you have already found within yourself. That absence of need is magnetic, because it is so rare. People sense that you are not with them out of fear, but out of freedom. The Stoics described this as inner freedom. Epictetus insisted that no one can enslave you if you refuse to surrender your will. Jung described it as integration, the process of reclaiming the scattered fragments of yourself so that you live as a whole being. Together, these truths explain why the aura of the 1% is so powerful. It represents a person who is no longer split between who they are and who they pretend to be. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to maintain a performance? To smile when you're hurting, to agree when you want to say no, to stay when you know you should leave? That exhaustion is the cost of fragmentation. But when you integrate, when abstinence teaches you to sit with discomfort instead of covering it, you no longer need to perform. Your presence is real. And that reality radiates in ways that words cannot capture. This is why people remember the rare few who carry this aura. It isn't about beauty, charm, or even intelligence. It's about authenticity. It's about the undeniable force of someone who has faced themselves fully and emerged whole. When you embody that, you do not need to chase. You do not need to prove. You do not need to bend yourself just to be wanted. Your presence speaks for itself. You may wonder what happens to your relationships once you've reached this point. They transform. The bonds you form are no longer built on fear or lack but on mutual respect and choice. You no longer accept scraps of attention just to feel alive, and you no longer tolerate patterns that drain you. Instead, you approach connection from abundance. You can give without losing yourself, and you can receive without dependency. That balance is what makes your relationships richer, steadier, and more real. And here is the final truth: this aura is not about making others notice you. It is about noticing yourself. It is about looking in the mirror and seeing not just fragments but a whole person, one who is worthy of love, respect, and peace, not because anyone else has granted it, but because you have claimed it. That claim is your freedom. That freedom is your power. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.